Hi there, and welcome to this episode of the GrowVC Everyone Funding Startups podcast. I'm your host, Marcus, and today we're talking about something very familiar for us in venture capital. And the setup is a little different from before. We're doing a Q&A with Randy Mitchell. Also on the episode, we have Yoko from GrowVC. So Randy, would you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much. Very nice to speak with you. My name is Randy Mitchell, and I'm an international trade strategist for venture capital and entrepreneurship at the United States Department of Commerce International Trade Administration in Washington, D.C. I also serve as the chairman of the OECD's Working Party on Entrepreneurship.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So let's get right to the point. And I'll pose the questions, and we can see where those take us.
Very good.
Starting with our first question. Randy, how do you see startup funding globally? What are the most important growth areas, and where are the biggest issues?
Well, the growth areas certainly are U.S.-centric, I would say, in terms of the venture capital. There remains opportunities in the United States, and we're beginning to see the exit markets pick up in terms of IPOs, albeit still slow, but there's some pickup. And so there are early stage companies that are getting funded, of course, in the United States, again, less than what has been in the past, but still a very healthy dynamic. The challenges, of course, internationally, whether it's in Europe or in other emerging markets, that venture capital specifically, and that's what your question is about, the venture side of this, as opposed to the broader category of private equity. The venture side is under severe challenges through most of the world's markets, with the exception of the United States. So the opportunities, as you ask, what are the important growth areas? I believe, for example, that there are great opportunities for U.S.-based venture capitalists to expand internationally. And I don't mean so much investing in foreign-based companies, but more specifically partnering with foreign-based VCs, working with those foreign VCs who have already identified opportunities but may not be able to fund the companies themselves exclusively, and therefore are looking to partner with a U.S.-based VC. So syndication, partnering, whatever you wish to call it, I do see that is an important growth area, is global venture capital partnerships. The issues, of course, are as with any partnership, and that is, knowing the partners, knowing each other, and knowing how you can make this work, and of course the cultural nuances and the challenges of doing anything internationally. But I do see those as important growth areas in the coming years.
Okay, let's go to the second question. Do you see any trends in global VC operations?
Well, this again goes back to the first answer I provided. I do see it's not as strong a trend as I would like to see, but it is emerging that there are cross-border cooperation between venture capitalists. It's really very early, but I am beginning to see it, and there are efforts. I think it's quite fair to identify the United States and Canada, for example. The Canadian government has a representative in Silicon Valley, and they have a representative, of course, in Toronto that's specifically working on venture capital, and the two of them working in some degree of cooperation with me, for example, at the U.S. Department of Commerce, are working to promote U.S. Venture capital interests in Canada, because the Canadian authorities see it in an obvious benefit to them, and we see it as an opportunity for U.S. venture capitalists. So that's one trend. I also see ever so slightly, this is just again an emerging trend, which is cross-border angel cooperation. So if you take, for example, there's a fund called Seraphin Fund that's UK based but with a US partnership in Northern Virginia. That's Seraphin, I believe it's Seraphyn, but I could be mistaken on the spelling. And this is where you have US angels and UK angels funding together UK-based companies who have aspirations of growing into the United States. And the point is, when they grow into the U.S. angels are there, in theory anyway, there to help them enter the U.S. market. So that is also a trend. Lastly, I would say just the overall trend in understanding the importance of angel investing to startup funding.
All right, third question. What could the new models be to improve startup funding?
Well, it's I'll answer this in a bit of an odd way, because you say new models, but I would even say looking backwards at old models. What I mean by this is that I believe that the U.S. SBIR program, Small Business Innovation Research program, is an excellent model that has been around since the late 1950s, early 1960s, if I'm not mistaken on the dates. And I won't go into it unless you want me to in detail, but the point here is that there is a very old model that has worked extremely well in the tune of $1 billion plus, that's billion with a B, $1 billion plus in the United States, going towards early stage funding. And this model has been replicated in other countries, including, if I'm not mistaken, the United Kingdom, albeit under a slightly different name. But there are other countries that are looking at this model. So, when you talk about improved startup funding, that is an old model that could be applied globally, that leverages the research and development dollars of governments to go towards early stage funding. Again, I'd be happy to go into more detail about that if you'd like, because I do think it's a very interesting program. Other new models, of course, I go back to angels, and more specifically, it's not as new today, but perhaps it is internationally, and that is organized angel investing, as opposed to just individuals being contacted by entrepreneurs. It's entrepreneurs contacting organized angel groups. That's an emerging model internationally as well, I believe.
On the topic of institutional investors, for example LPs, how do you think they view the VC asset class in the current setting?
It's an interesting question, and having just traveled around the world in March, visiting 5 cities in about 14 days, and having interacted with the neighborhoods of 100 LPs, I do see that there's some degree of reluctance in terms of venture capital as an asset class by internationally based LPs. That's not to say the same is true for US based LPs. So the internationally based LPs, I think, see the opportunities in the broader asset class of private equity and are not as comfortable on the venture side. Some are, obviously, but there are many who are not. Now, that again, internationally, when you look domestically in the United States, I think that the institutional investors do see the long-term opportunities in venture capital. They have had to modify their investing, more recently over the past 2 years because of challenges that they've had in their investments in other asset classes that has reduced the allocation that they have available for venture capital. But I do see going forward that institutional investors, as they have historically, will continue to find the venture capital asset class attractive. The returns will be attractive, and U.S.-based institutional investors